you are all staying warm inside. It is freezing out there. Okay, so um, both sociology classes left off at slightly different places yesterday. So I actually did a little rearranging of the slides. The slide that you're looking at now is actually the last slide in the presentation that you have in your Blackboard classroom. But I thought that maybe starting with this might actually be kind of a helpful point to bring us all together on. So this is chapter 1, right? The only thing we have left to talk about are the three main sociological perspectives. And so this handy graphic organizer here, right? Remember, our perspectives are just a point of view or a way of looking at things. And our three perspectives don't have one that's more right than another. It's just three lenses through which we can analyze social facts and social situations. And so I thought it might be helpful to see how we have already learned the terms macro level and micro level to see how the different perspectives play out. And so this actually goes in chronological progression here, right? That the functionalist perspective is the first or the original perspective in sociology, again, looking at macro level interactions. Or macro level societal issues versus interactions. And conflict is the second one to come. And then we have the micro level analyzing groups and individuals being interactionist perspective, sometimes called symbolic interactionism. And so let's start with functionalism. Okay. So the functionalists, right, believe that every part of society serves a purpose. The vocabulary term your book used was dynamic equilibrium, that everything would kind of be working together in harmony for like this well-oiled machine known as society. If something doesn't fit in, it's kind of eliminated naturally. And so like if you think of like technological advances and the purposes those serve to society, well, it kind of makes sense that as these things become obsolete, um, they kind of are eliminated naturally. So it's kind of interesting. Tech is an easy example, but we can talk about like elements or structures of a family. Like, what does a family look like in 21st century society? A lot different than it did in 19th century society, but is you know the nuclear family of the industrial revolution necessary in a post-industrial revolution. So it's kind of cool to look at like how everything serves a purpose or a function. Um, Functionalists acknowledge that sometimes things have negative effects, and they just call the negative effects dysfunction. All right. And so, like, we can talk about, school having a function in your life, and we can certainly um, list lots of dysfunctions of school, right? Like the time of day that we make you get up and the amount of work we put on students. There are, absence rates, tardy rates, disciplinary issues. I mean, those can all be listed as dysfunctions of school. Although today maybe we like school a little more since we're all at home in our jammies. All right, manifest and latent function. Remember that most things have an intended purpose. That's your manifest function. And some things, of course, have a hidden function, which is your latent function. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So manifest and latent function, like again, school manifest function to educate you on your core subjects, latent function teaching you things like time management, organization, interpersonal skills. Like you don't get grades on your report card for those things, but yet they're still important functions of school in getting you prepared for life. And then some of the people we talked about yesterday in class that would align with the functionalist perspective would be Spencer and Durkheim. Okay, now we can look at the conflict perspective. we remember that Karl Marx in our history lesson yesterday was against this whole, let's look at the function of society. Let's instead concentrate on aspects that encourage competition and change. Marx thought the real way to understand groups of people and to understand culture and society was to look at the problems, not to look at like how it's working together. Okay. And you can see why Karl Marx thought this concerning sociology. That second bullet there, competition is over limited resources. Remember, that's his whole basis of his communist economic theory. So it just kind of, is borrowed in the field of sociology. Okay, now, an expansion of the conflict perspective that we will get to in limited amounts eventually in class is this whole concept of critical theory. And there are a number of modern sociologists that would label themselves as critical theorists, okay, which means that they focus exclusively on structural issues that cause inequality. And so, like from a school perspective, I use those examples a lot because we're all in school and that's where my research area is, but is in ed soc. But like the critical theorists would say, oh, well, when we look at like academic performance of subgroups in schools, there are a lot of structural, like systemic problems that are like barriers, big macro level barriers to specific subgroups in our school being successful academically. And so they're kind of like an expansion or an offshoot of conflict perspective in modern soc. So, when we get to those critical theorists, if you're trying to organize your learning in your head, you could group those with the conflict perspective theorists to kind of keep everything organized. So yeah, Karl Marx, Max Weber, we could consider a conflict theorist. Okay, then our third lens or our third perspective, okay, is interactionist. So you remember on our chart, they were kind of not looking at things at a macro level, but instead saying, well, if you want to understand groups of people and how they interact, you should view society as a collection of small interactions, right? Look at micro level interactions. The interactionists are really interested in kind of observing and recording intentions and meanings that are conveyed by individual actions. That's why they're sometimes called symbolic interactionists, because they like to analyze symbols and their meaning within a culture. There was a vocab term, okay, Goffman came up with this, I think it was, I don't remember if it was mentioned in your book under the interactionist perspective, or if it was in the history part. Okay, but if we look at like dramaturgy, we can look at analyzing society using drama. Goffman's whole process was based on using theater as an analogy for society. And so like it always makes me think of the famous Shakespeare quote, all the world's a stage and the men and women merely players. So maybe Shakespeare was an interactionist theorist before sociology becomes a discipline. But anyways, like looking again at like right now, I am playing my role of teacher as I perform for you and give you your notes over chapter 1, and you are playing the role of student as you wonderfully disciplined as you sit at home on your icy day learning about sociology. So Goffman thought, well, just use theater as an analogy in like the different roles, the settings, right? The scenes and how people interact dependent upon like which scene they're in. Just like conflict perspective, eventually we'll get to some expansion on the interactionist perspective, which is a movement known as constructivism. Okay, this gets a little interesting. Constructivism has its roots in like postmodern philosophical theory. Um, and so, if the interactionists are interested in looking at micro level interactions and they're interested in looking at the symbols we use to communicate and the meaning behind those symbols, there are some individuals that thought, well, that just means that any reality it is whatever people think it is, right? So that's why I put reality equals human cognition. Um, and so the constructivists like to focus on like the creation of culture by individuals. Um, it gets a little philosophical, right? Because I don't know, we don't want to fall down that rabbit hole of like your reality is whatever it is for you, and my reality is whatever it is for me. And there is no such thing as, truth. And it's kind of up to each person. I mean, that makes when we go down to that like kind of extreme, that slippery slope, that makes it really hard to scientifically study any people and their thoughts. So we'll kind of like look at that and critique that, when in due time on specific subjects. But when we get to things that are labeled, or people or theories that are labeled as constructivist theories, don't panic. You will say, constructivism is just an expansion of SI, or the interactionist perspective. Okay. Mead is a great example of someone from our history timeline that would fit under this perspective. And I put Weber too. And I know you're like, wait a minute, I just had Weber on the conflict slide. I do think that Weber is examples of both, right? That focusing on competition and change, but yet being very interested in studying things like on that micro level. Because remember from yesterday, right? The Verstehen, right? My apologies for my German pronunciations, but right, that Weber thought like, let's really get into like go beyond the like social facts, and being a big proponent of qualitative sociology. So I still think that could constitute an interactionist perspective, in that like digging deep into the subjectivity of culture, even though a lot of his ideas still align with focusing on competition and change. So we can put him in both spots. Okay. So I hope that helps, right? We're back to the chart, right? I think that the best way to kind of make sure that you understand the perspectives, because again, although I have a extreme appreciation for the founders of sociology, we kind of talk about those people in due time, right? So we'll revisit people, Marx and Weber, as we get to theories specific to topics that we discuss in class. The really important thing to master out of chapter 1 is the understanding of the 3 perspectives, right? Because we will use these the entire semester. So take a look at the sheet that I gave you yesterday. Practice with the people. I think that just kind of gives you a feel for, like the types of questions that might be on your quiz. And the back part is really nice practice using these 3 theories, right? Like, how would a functionalist explain a topic, conflict? How would SI explain a topic? So try those out. I'm going to post the answer key to those in Blackboard in your classroom, so you can download my answers and then compare them to your own. And then since we also have tomorrow off of school, I'll email you kind of directions as to what we plan to do in class on Friday. So thank you so much for listening. I apologize for the roughness of this presentation, but hey, happy wind chill day. I just woke up. So yeah, enjoy your day off, and thanks for listening.